The Weasleys are beloved. They're warm, loyal, and chronically broke. And while the books frame their poverty as charming, the evidence tells a different story. One where almost every financial problem they had was entirely self-inflicted. These are all the reasons the Weasleys being poor was their own fault. Arthur turned down promotions. Repeatedly. On purpose. Let's start at the top. Arthur Weasley worked in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office at the Ministry of Magic, a department so obscure and low priority that it apparently consisted of, at various points, just him. The salary reflected that. Now here's the thing, Arthur was offered promotions. Multiple times. He didn't take them. Not because they weren't available, not because he was passed over, not because the timing was wrong. He turned them down because he liked his current job. He enjoyed working with Muggle objects, and the promotions would have moved him away from that, which is a perfectly understandable human feeling. Most people have been in a job they love that doesn't pay well. The difference is that most people doing that don't also have 7 children to feed, clothe, and send to school. Arthur made a conscious, repeated choice to prioritize his own job satisfaction over his family's financial stability. Every single time an opportunity arose, he said no. That's not bad luck. That's a decision. Molly didn't work. Molly Weasley was a full-time homemaker. And while that role carries genuine value and enormous labor, it produced 0 additional income for a family that was clearly struggling financially. That's a meaningful trade-off, and it becomes particularly difficult to defend from book 2 onwards. Here's the timeline. Ginny, the youngest, starts Hogwarts at the beginning of Chamber of Secrets. From that point on, all 7 children are at school for 9 months of the year. Molly and Arthur are effectively empty nesters for 3/4 of every calendar year. The argument that she needed to be home for the children evaporates the moment the last child boards the Hogwarts Express. What exactly was she doing all day that precluded any form of paid work? The gnomes in the garden? The chickens? Molly never monetized her obvious skills. This one is particularly frustrating because the solutions were right there. Molly Weasley was an exceptionally talented witch. She ran a large household, cooked elaborate meals, managed complex magical repairs, knitted intricate garments, and grew her own produce. These are not trivial skills. She could have sold her baked goods. She could have brewed and sold potions. She could have taken in magical repairs or tailoring. She could have duplicated yarn, which is not subject to the same magical restrictions as food or money, and sold finished knitwear. She sent every Weasley child and Harry Potter a hand-knitted jumper every single Christmas. That's skilled craft work. That's a cottage industry waiting to happen. Instead, it was a gift, a free gift, to a family that was emptying its entire bank account for school supplies. They chose to have 7 children on one modest government salary. At some point, someone in the Weasley household had to make a calculation. Or rather, they had to repeatedly not make one. Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred, George, Ron, Ginny. 7 children, born over roughly a decade, on a single income from a low-tier ministry position. Each child meant another Hogwarts kit, another wand at 7 galleons, another set of robes, textbooks, cauldrons, scales, telescopes, and potion ingredients. Multiplied across 7 children who were often simultaneously at school, that's a genuinely staggering ongoing cost. At no point did anyone apparently sit down and say, "We cannot afford this." They just kept going, apparently operating on the basis that it would work itself out. It did not work itself out. It worked itself into Molly emptying the entire contents of their Gringotts vault for a single school year. The will manage mentality is not a financial strategy. There's a moment in the books where the Weasleys' approach to money is essentially summarized as will manage. And to their credit, they did manage. In the sense that nobody starved and everyone made it to Hogwarts. But managing and planning are 2 different things. Managing means reacting to financial pressure as it arrives and getting through it. Planning means anticipating costs, building savings, and making proactive decisions to avoid crisis. The Weasleys were perpetual managers. The Egypt trip lottery win, which we'll come to shortly, is the perfect illustration. When money arrived unexpectedly, there was no savings plan it slotted into, no debt it cleared, no structural improvement it funded. It just got spent. Because managing isn't the same as thinking ahead. They blew a significant windfall on a holiday. Between Philosopher's Stone and Chamber of Secrets, the Weasley family won 700 galleons in a daily profit lottery. Whatever the exact pound conversion, it was a meaningful sum for a family of their means. Enough to make a real difference. They spent it on a month-long trip to Egypt. Now, Bill was working in Egypt, So there's a family reunion element to this that softens it slightly. And a holiday with 9 people is genuinely expensive. But the broader point stands. A family that was demonstrably struggling with school supply costs, wand replacements, and secondhand robes received a windfall and immediately spent it on travel. There was no portion saved, no school fund established, no practical investment made. They came back from Egypt, went to Diagon Alley, and Molly had to empty what remained of the vault to buy supplies. The holiday didn't solve anything. It was just a very enjoyable way to remain broke. No provision was made for foreseeable formal events. The Yule Ball in Goblet of Fire was not a surprise. It was announced well in advance. It required formal robes. Ron is a teenage boy attending a prestigious wizarding school. The idea that formal occasions might arise at some point was not an outlandish prediction. Molly sent Ron secondhand Victorian dress robes with lace. The kind of thing that, in a modern wizarding context, was so outdated it was actively embarrassing to wear. Not because there was no warning, not because it was an emergency, but because no financial planning had accounted for a teenager occasionally needing presentable formal clothing. The result was that Ron spent one of the defining social events of his Hogwarts years mortified and resentful. Their children's psychological well-being took measurable damage. This one isn't just about money, it's about the downstream effects of financial management on the people living inside it. Ron Weasley carries a deep, corrosive sense of inadequacy and status anxiety throughout the entire series. He's embarrassed by his family's poverty in a way that shapes his relationships, his insecurities, and even his behavior during Deathly Hallows when the Horcrux locket amplifies his worst fears about being second-rate. Percy Weasley's estrangement from the family is complex, but at its root is a young man who watched his parents make choices that kept the whole family in financial embarrassment and decided, problematically but understandably, that he was going to build something different for himself. Fred and George, brilliant and entrepreneurial, had to resort to entering a dangerous illegal betting scheme at the Triwizard Tournament just to try to fund their business dream, because there was no family money to draw on, and no parental support for their ambitions. The poverty didn't just affect the bank balance, it shaped who these children became. Arthur never exploited his unique legal position. Arthur Weasley wrote the laws governing Muggle artifacts. He understood those laws better than anyone in the Ministry. He knew exactly where the lines were, and he apparently knew how to operate close to them. The enchanted Fort Anglia being a fairly obvious example. That same knowledge and position could theoretically have been used to find entirely legal ways to supplement the family income. Consulting work, advisory roles, legitimate magical modification of Muggle goods for paying clients who wanted something exotic. Arthur had niche expertise that virtually nobody else in the wizarding world possessed, and he never appears to have considered turning it into anything beyond a personal hobby. Finally, they never thought to shop in the Muggle world. Arthur Weasley's entire personality is built around his fascination with Muggle culture. He collected Muggle objects. He studied how they worked. He was arguably more knowledgeable about Muggle life than most wizards alive. And yet, it apparently never occurred to anyone in the family to exchange a small amount of wizard money for Muggle pounds and go shopping somewhere dramatically cheaper. Muggle clothes cost less than wizarding robes. Muggle stationery, bags, and general supplies cost a fraction of their Diagon Alley equivalents. Basic foodstuffs from a Muggle supermarket would have been significantly cheaper than whatever the wizarding equivalent was. The man who kept a collection of batteries and plugs in his shed could have walked into any high street and saved the family meaningful money. He never did. If you want to understand why Wizarding World magic created more plot holes than it solved, watch our breakdown of every magic system the movies never explained. Because the Weasleys' financial situation is just the beginning of what stops making sense the moment you think about it too hard.